over the course of this week, you're going to hear a lot and get to know a lot about the life of Ronan Ferriter. He goes by Ty, and today he is 16 years old. But this case starts, and really the focus of what his life was like is how his life was in end of December 2021 and January of 2022 when he was just 14 years old. This morning, you're going to learn that on January 28th, 2022, he ran away from home. He lived in Jupiter, Florida at that time with his parents, the defendant, Tim Ferriter, and his mom, Tracy Ferriter. You're going to hear that Ronan was adopted as a child, as a small child, a toddler age, from Vietnam, and he had lived with the Ferriters since that time. He was the second of their 4 children. He has an older sister named Fiona, who you're also going to get to hear from at this during this trial, a younger sister named Nola, and a much younger little brother named Pierce, who was about 3 years old when all of this happened. And in January of 2022, he was a student at Independence Middle School and 14 years old. You're going to hear on the 28th, he ran away from home. He was reported missing to the Jupiter Police Department, and that's where this case starts. You're going to hear from Jupiter Police Department officers who are going to tell you that they took the report of a missing child and that he didn't come home on the next day on the 29th, and he also still was not located on the 30th. They went back to the Ferriter residence to find out if there was new information. Had he come home? Was there any leads? The day he left was a Friday, still wasn't there on Saturday, and on Sunday, Detective Sharp from the Jupiter Police Department went into the Ferriter home with Tracy Ferriter. You're going to hear it's at that point that for the very first time he learned about how Ronan was living, about what his living situation was like at home with his parents. He's going to tell you that he was shown the house, and the first thing that stood out to him was that the child who they were looking for didn't have a place to sleep in the main house. There wasn't a bedroom for him. There weren't his items of clothes. There weren't his toys inside of the house. Instead, there was a structure, a small room box-like structure that was constructed in the garage that didn't have any windows. It had a box spring and a mattress, a bucket in the corner, and a desk. You're going to hear that at that point, the child still wasn't found, and so Detective Sharp left and continued the investigation. And the next day, which is Monday, January 31st, Ronan shows up at his school. And there he is made secure, made safe by the Jupiter Police Department, and that's when the criminal investigation really starts, after they had the opportunity to speak to him. You're going to hear that as part of the investigation, during that initial walkthrough of the room, Detective Sharp realized that that small cell-like room had a ring camera in the corner to observe the occupant of the room. And so as part of his investigation, he served a search warrant to the Ring Corporation to see if they had maintained any videos. And you're going to get the opportunity to see and hear that evidence that was returned from the Ring Corporation, because that Ring camera captured moment after moment of Ronan's life in that room. You're going to hear over and over and over again that door locking and unlocking, because the evidence is going to show that that room was not a room that Ronan could come and go from as he pleased. He was locked inside from the outside over and over again. You're also going to see that he did not have the ability to control things like the lights in that room, that the only way that those lights could be controlled was outside the room. And so you're going to see him sitting in the dark in a windowless room for hours at a time. And we're not just talking from 10 p.m. till 7 o'clock in the morning overnight. You're going to see that even during the day, there are times in which his parents, the defendant and his wife, would turn off that light and leave their 14-year-old son locked in a room in the dark, alone, isolated. You're also going to get to observe and hear the anger and the derision, the physical altercations that this defendant has with his child on the Ring camera, physical intimidation, and the threats of violence. You're also going to see Ronan having to use that bucket, having to pee in the bucket because for hours overnight, he did not have access or the opportunity to go to the bathroom. And the only option for him was to pee in the bucket. And then you're going to see the next morning when that occurred, that this defendant would tell him, clean out the bucket, make sure the neighbors don't see you doing that. Because this treatment, his life, was kind of a secret thing. And you're going to hear that it's not the state's case, and it's not the evidence in this case that he was kept in there 24 hours a day. He went to school. There were times where he was outside of the room with his family. There was times where he was shoveling shells for his father for hours at a time. But for long periods of time, for mass majority of this child's life, in that period in Jupiter, Florida, he's in that room, isolated, alone, without autonomy, without privacy, without stimulation, sometimes with only a single book to read over and over again. As part of the evidence in this case, you're going to hear that the defendants are charged with that 4-week period, that 4 to 6 week period, because the family moved to Jupiter, Florida in December of 2021. Mid-December, kind of a week or two before Christmas, and this all happens at the end of January. So we're talking about 6 weeks when they are in Palm Beach County, Florida. And so that's the charged time period. That's the criminal conduct that we're talking about. But the state expects that you're going to hear evidence about Ronan's life before the family moved to Florida, when they lived in Arizona. We expect that you're going to hear testimony about a very similar, nearly identical room that the family constructed for him in Arizona, in which he had been residing in since he was 11 years old. You're going to hear that that room had no access to a bathroom, no control of the lights, no freedom of movement, that he was recorded, and that he was locked in from the outside with only a bucket to go to the bathroom. The charges in this case are aggravated child abuse, child neglect, and false imprisonment. And at the end of this trial, Judge Coates is going to read you instructions about what the law is for child abuse in the state of Florida. And you're going to hear that there's child abuse and there's aggravated child abuse. Aggravated child abuse occurs when a defendant engages in malicious punishment of a child, willful torture, or the willful caging of a child. And those are in the alternative, meaning it could be any of them. And child abuse in the state of Florida means the intentional act that causes physical or mental harm, or conduct that is likely to cause physical or mental harm. So that doesn't mean that there actually has to be harm. It's just that it's likely to cause harm, that they engaged in an act that is likely to harm a child. And to help you understand what the harm is here and how this conduct is criminal, the state is going to call a Dr. Wade Meyer. Dr. Meyer is a child psychiatrist. He's affiliated with Brown University, and he's going to tell you the impact that this kind of treatment has on a child, that it's humiliating, isolating, cruel, and malicious. He's going to tell you that it will cause harm to any child, but it will certainly cause harm. That harm could be exacerbated if that child already has a behavioral issue or has trauma. And you're going to hear about some of that in this case. It's true, and Ronan will admit, that there are times that he did not follow the rules, that he made mistakes, and that he did things that his parents punished him for. But you're going to hear that in no circumstance is this a protective punishment for any child, and in particular for a child who may have issues with trauma or a behavioral issue, that this is the worst possible thing that a parent could do. It is the exact opposite of any recommended treatment, of any therapeutic purpose, or anything that would lead to productive response from a child. Instead, Dr. Myers would tell you that it would increase the likelihood of behavioral issues. Because when you isolate a child like this, when you humiliate them, when you basically put them in solitary confinement for large portions of the day, that has a negative mental impact. At the end of this trial, Judge Coates will instruct you on the law, but I want to be very clear on a couple of things. The state here does not have to prove that every moment of its day they were committing a crime against Ronan Ferriter. We don't have to prove that there are no moments when he was let out of the room. That's not the state's case, and that's not what Dr. Myers is going to say is necessary to cause harm. We also don't have to prove, and you're not going to hear, that there's any kind of legal defense or special standard for a child that has behavioral issues. That if
Overruled.
the law, you're going to hear from Judge Coates. The law you're going to hear from Judge Coates is not going to be that there's any kind of affirmative defense or that there's any different standard just because a child has behavioral issues. We're here today because of the actions of Tim Ferriter towards his son. They were ongoing, they were intentional, and they were criminal. And so at the end of this trial, after you have heard all of the evidence, all of the testimony and the law from Judge Coates, we're going to ask you for the only verdict that is supported by the evidence and the law. And that's a verdict of guilty as charged. Thank you.